whatever score, and then you go back the second time and get all your answers. So if you got, even if you did it that way.
All right, let's go ahead and get started. I forgot to bring my roll sheet today, so if someone has a binder paper, I'll just kind of borrow that. I promise I'll return it. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started today. We have kind of some interesting and some boring topics for today. Applications are not particularly, interesting in some ways, but I think it's interesting in some other ways. Just write your name on the piece of paper, and that's good enough.
Name or initials?
Names, because it's blank.
Oh, all right.
There you go.
It wouldn't really do too much else.
All right. So we're going to talk about Office suites, today to start with, which is a little bit boring because these are all kind of desktop applications. But these are also programs or applications where you can get a job if you are good at these, or you can turn in your English paper correctly if you know how to work with these things. We'll start with the ones that people know the most about, which is word processing. What is word processing? It turns your computer into what?
Typewriter.
A typewriter. Very good. A fancy typewriter at that.
Nifty tools.
A very nifty tool. And it is one of the first applications for personal computers. Okay, this predates IBM PCs. During the Apple II days, does anyone know what an Apple II is?
Very old.
It was. Okay, they had a CPM card. You can actually insert a card that has a different processor than the Apple II native processor, and then you can run CPM. CPM is the short form of Control Program / Master, and it's an operating system. It later became DOS, basically. If you read the history of DOS, it's basically CPM rebranded by Microsoft. So, what do you do with word processors?
Type. Write papers.
You type, you write papers. Okay. So let's see what else you can do with. What choices have you got with Office suites? This is a little table here. I don't know what's going on with that little tab here, but we have all these options. I'm gonna just go ahead and read it out because the font is a little bit small and I can't really magnify it with this interface. The first one is Google Docs. How many people use Google Docs? Okay. Yeah, I use Google Docs for many things. Anything that does not have any issues with security or privacy, Google Docs is one of the best ways to share information with other people. What can you do with Google Docs? Is it really just an online word processor? Or what do you use it for? I just wanted to hear from you guys first, and then I'll pitch it.
You can actually work on stuff together in a group on the same document at the same time.
Exactly. You can work on the same document at the same time. Now, how can you be sure that you guys won't be editing the same sentence at the same time?
It actually color codes it for who's editing what where.
Yep, it color codes the cursor of everybody who's editing at the same time. So as long as you don't have the cursors overlapping on the same sentence, you know that you guys are working on different portions. You can also leave comments to each other. You can right-click, select a piece of text, right-click, and then leave comments on the side. So that way it's easy to say, okay, I made these changes because da-da-da-da-da. And it's really a great tool for collaboration. Now you can do something like that with Microsoft Word, but with Microsoft Word, it is a file. So it is really kind of cumbersome to have to integrate multiple versions of the same document back into one single document. Whereas with Google Docs, it's all live. You look at the documents online and you see the current state of the document at any particular time. It's a great tool. I use Google Docs for camping trip arrangements. Who's going to bring what on what day? And it's a great tool because multiple families can now start to say, okay, I'm going to bring this or that and whatnot, and then we can even see the changes online live. Then sometimes we can just open up a chat channel on the side and say, okay, I got this already. Do you want to bring yours or bring mine, and so on and so forth. It's a great tool. Google in general has a lot of useful tool for collaboration. Whether it's a business plan or a camping trip or just about anything else. The only downside of Google Docs is what? I mentioned that a little bit earlier. Privacy, okay? Privacy and security. Security, I'm not so concerned about, because I think, it's, if someone can break into the Google Master, system, I think we have issues. But privacy, there's no privacy. Have you guys noticed, depending on what kind of email you send and receive, using Gmail, the ad on top would change. It's sensitive to the content that you receive or you transmit. So there's no such thing as privacy. I'm pretty sure the EULA of using Google already includes a clause that says, we can use that information for advertisement purposes. Okay. Any questions about Google Docs? Do you guys want to see what it looks like? I mean, it's pretty easy.
Sure.
Okay, we'll go take a look. It cannot hurt.
We're already at Google.
We're right.
Yep.
Where should go?
Force I have it, I guess.
Google Drive, I upgraded my Google Documents to Google Drive. I added some extra space to it. And it's asking me for
Personal information.
I just have to make sure there's no keylogger installed here. All right, it's getting loaded up. I have ARC.
Robot versus zombies.
Yeah, Robots versus Zombie, level 8.
Is that a game you made?
No, mini clip. And these are my ARC documents, which means if I want to share these documents with my colleagues, I can do it by several means. I can either send them a link, or I can email them, and so that they can also edit the documents. I can also share these documents with the world because when you right-click on the document, it gives you options of how to share a particular document. So let's say I want to share. Let's see here. Okay, California Connects Agenda. Okay, this is one of the documents. It's an older document. And if I go to organize, it let me put it into different folders. And then if I right click and click on share, which is up here, it gives me several options. I can change the main option here. And right now it is private, which means only I can give people permissions to even read the document. If someone does not have the name on the list, they cannot even view the document. And then when I add people to the list, I can say this person can view the document, but this person can also edit the document. I have complete control of the document. If I select anyone with the link, that means the document is not searchable on the web, and only people with the specific link to the document can either view or edit it. I can select whether it is read-only or not. Or I can make it open to the entire web, which means it will be indexed. In that case, Google can index content of my document, and people will be able to use Google to search and find my document. So any questions about these sharing options? Not unlike YouTube. Yep.
So public option, does it have an option to have just read-only? Or?
Yes. Yep. With anyone with the link and public on the web, you have the option to turn on full editing. Everybody has full access to the document, or just read-only. In fact, I can just click here, and then you have allow anyone to edit, which is kind of interesting for a public document because you can always backtrack. By the way, it saves how a document was edited, so you can actually go back in time and say I want to undo these changes. So it's kind of neat in many ways.
See what people do to your work. See what people can do to your work.
Yep.
Right. It's kind of like Wikipedia.
It's kind of like Wikipedia, except it's not. It has more editing options because it's kind of more of a word processor than a web document. So if I want to add people, I can just click here, and then I can look through my own contact list, or I can just insert the email address to someone that I want to have access to my document. And then I can also click here to change whether that person can only view the document, or can that person also make changes to the document. I think this is a really great feature. If you want to do something with other people, when you want to work on something at the same time, It's a really great tool. So that's pretty much Google Documents. The other thing you can also do is to share the entire folder. Like in this case, I have one folder that is shared with a whole bunch of people. So that means these people will also have access to the documents inside these folders. So by default, okay, you can change the default so that documents in the inside actually has protection. Any questions about using Google Documents? No questions? You can upgrade Google Documents to Google Drive, which is what I have. And with Google Drive, you can upload any type of documents to Google and share it with people. In other words, it kind of can do the same thing as Dropbox. Does anyone know what Dropbox is? Dropbox is a file sharing mechanism, and it can kind of duplicate that functionality with Dropbox. But in addition to Dropbox, you can also edit documents online. With actual documents, you have a lot of control. If I go to create and document, which is basically the word processor. Thank you. Does this look familiar to you, the user interface? It will not look familiar to anyone who started to use Office 2007 or later, because that's when they changed to all the ribbon look. This is how word processors used to look like before Office 2007. It's completely menu driven. It's not very pretty, but it's functional. Even for writing an English paper, you can probably still get a lot done. You may not be able to get everything done. I don't know for sure. I haven't tried it.
Yes, you
but
can.
You can?
Yes, but you gotta spend a lot more time
To do
the double spacing.
Oh, double
Correctly.
spacing is under format.
I know, but to do it correctly in the MLA format, to do the heading. Remember, you have to put the college heading on it now.
Right.
So that's a bit harder.
That's a
for
bit
the heading
harder?
part.
Have you tried to contact the Google team and suggest? I'm not kidding. I mean, you can go to the Google team and just send a suggestion.
Maybe they'll see this video.
And see what happens.
Maybe they'll see this video and hear this what we're talking about. Maybe take it
Yeah.
out.
Yeah. But this looks just like any word processor. Any simple word processor. For one thing, it has more features than WordPad that is included in Windows. WordPad has even less features than this. But what if you want to turn your thing and be able to save it as a document, because some people do not want to use Google Doc? You just go to File, and then you can go to Download As, and then you can select any one of these formats. In other words, it's fairly easy to use. You can save it as one of these older file-based formats, and then you have your own local copy of the document as a backup. You can even insert pictures, so you can insert equations, drawing, images, links, and I have used a lot of these features myself, because sometimes when I want to type a document, I use Google Doc. Why do I want to use Google Doc when I have 20 gazillions computers that I have access to? That's exactly the reason, right? If I use one of the 20 gazillion computers that I have access to, and I save the file locally, what happens when I want to access the file when I'm somewhere else? I can do it, but it's a lot of trouble. But if I do it in Google Docs, it doesn't matter. I can do it on my phone. Not nearly as conveniently, but I can do it on the phone. It's easy. Any Android phone already has Doc or Drive as an application. You can download and install that. But for typing a full English paper, I would probably still prefer a computer. You can do some minor editing. It's just it's very troublesome to go through the phone interface to edit a full document like that. One feature that I really, really want them to implement is the concept of a sub-document, which is in LibreOffice and also in Microsoft Office. With the concept of a sub-document, your main document can include several other documents as components. So that way, if you have the same, like opening, for a particular kind of letter, you can just, include a sub-document, and then you can customize, some parts of it, and then also include another sub-document as the closing of the business letter. But Google Documents doesn't have that feature yet. Maybe I should send another email to Google. Any other questions? I can show you how the school uses Google Documents. So if I go to shared with me, and there's a lot, okay? These are curriculums, or curricula, because they're multiple. Each one is a proposal to change, to update, or to create a new course at ARC. So in this case, this is probably a revision. Oh, this is new to district, so this is a new course with automotive technology. It talks about how to use the snap-on tool called Modus. And my job is to go to a particular section and particularly review the online delivery modality. Now this is also kind of interesting because we were talking about technology, how computers kind of, is a revolution. It changes the way we do things. This is AT, automotive technology, and look at the modality. How are you going to take this class? It can be offered in a hybrid mode, which means you come to on campus for several hours, and then some of the work you have to do online. Or guess what? You can take this class completely online. It's an automotive technology class. What makes that possible? How about 30 years ago? Let's say we have the internet already 30 years ago. Do you think we were ready to take classes with automotive technology completely online? Because the cars were not ready. This class is a complete software class. It talks about how to use a particular software tool when people have to do diagnosis on cars. And that's only possible because cars can now talk back in computer language. So my job is to go into particular sections that is missing. That's strange. It's supposed to be here, but it's missing. Okay, refresh. Either that or Google Doc got hacked.
They specifically targeted you.
Yeah, high security stuff. Course outline, right?
Yeah.
Nope, it's not there. But if I had to, okay, well, maybe it's time for me to put a comment here. I just highlight a portion of that, right click, click on comment, and you can see that I can write my comments here, and I will say, where is the rest of this document? And press the enter key. So whenever I hover over, it does show up on the other side, but because I zoom in so much, it doesn't really show on the other side. If I change the zoom ratio back to what it should be, you can see that I can view my own comment, and it also indicates when I left that comment too. And at this point, even though I have not saved, quote unquote, saved the file, every other member of this document who will share this document can see my comment at this point. So I think that's a really nice feature when you have a document where multiple people need to review and make changes.
You want to save like after you.
It automatically saves. As soon as I type something. Okay, let me type something here. There's one flag that all changes saved. It takes about maybe 1 or 2 seconds. Every time you make some changes, it takes about 1 or 2 seconds before the JavaScript end, which is running on the client side, your computer, decides to upload all the new content to the other side. But for the most part, if your computer loses its power, you probably will lose about a few seconds of work, and that's about it. For people who copy and paste, that can be a lot of content.
Yeah.
But for us who actually type, not a whole lot.
Lose 5 pages.
That's how some people turn in their homework too. Copy, paste, I'm done, saved.
Where's that easy button?
It's easy for me to tell that it's copied and pasted too.
You just have to do that into the Google search bar.
Yep. All right. Any other questions about Google Documents? If word processing is new to you, this is actually a very good learning tool. To date, I still cannot use Microsoft Office 2007. I could not make the transition from menu-driven to the ribbon system that they have changed to. And in Windows 8, and I guess the next version of Microsoft Office, they will try to use the tile design, I guess. Has anyone used or has anyone seen the latest reincarnation of Microsoft Office?
Not yet.
Not yet. I think they're gonna go for the tile design because that's their theme for Windows 8.
Yeah, because they're trying to do the whole the touch display.
Mm-hmm. Which I
That's
think
what
is
they do.
probably not a very good idea.
Find out soon.
Well, you know, Microsoft always has one off, and this is the off one.
Mm-hmm.
The 8, because they always have one that bombs, like Vista bombed, and then 7 picked up. And before Vista was XP. So just like now, they finally got rid of XP.
XP was a great operating system. It's more it's very small. It doesn't use up a lot of resources.
Yeah, because it didn't have the arrow. That's
Arrow
basically
glass.
the problem. Most people are complaining if the computer's too slow. It's
Mhm.
because of the aerodynamics that they added onto it.
Mhm.
Most of the older computers don't have a graphics card that's like today's standard.
Mhm.
Today's $10 graphics card is like back then's $1,000 graphics card.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a big difference, and a lot of people don't want to spend that $10 just to get it up the way it was. So they
Mhm.
just keep on complaining.
Or if you want to run it inside the virtual machine, it helps a lot
the,
too.
The the XP mode on the Windows 7 works really good.
Mm-hmm.
It is much better.
I can run Windows XP with Linux, inside Linux as a virtual machine, and watch Netflix. iWorks, I guess that's a Mac installed, software. LibreOffice is what I use, personally, and I have that pre-installed on this ISO. So I just go to Office, and I'll just open up the word processor so you can just compare the look and feel of Google Doc versus LibreOffice Writer. Do you think they share a lot of common features? If you just look at how the menus are arranged, compare that to this. And I'll put it side by side, or kind of as much as I can, put them side by side like this. Do you think they share some features?
Good amount.
When you click on the actual menu items, that's also a lot of that is actually common as well. In other words, if you know how to use one, the other one is like easy. It's very easy to navigate in either case. LibreOffice is installed. It has to be an installed product. Later on, we'll talk about what a portable app is, and that makes it more flexible. But still, you have to install it onto a jump drive in that case. So getting back to here, we obviously have Microsoft Office, which is the quote-unquote industry standard in business and commercial applications. Microsoft Office 365, that's online, which is their competing product with Google Docs. I have not used it personally. Has anyone used and be able to compare Google Docs versus Microsoft Office 365?
It has its ups and downs, like everything.
Mm-hmm.
It does has a majority of functions from Microsoft Office, which is the plus over Google Docs because it's still the basic WordPad type style.
Mm-hmm.
But as to people who connect to it, because of the Gmail base, there's a lot more users than there is on the Microsoft side.
Mhm.
So the sharing is still better on Google side. So
How about the collaboration part, like allowing multiple people to edit at the
I
same
haven't done that
time?
yet. Because I don't know a lot of people who has a Live or a Hotmail account,
Okay.
and I only have one because I have an Xbox.
I know a lot of people have Hotmail accounts because I can see the spam messages from those accounts.
Yeah, that's the big problem with it. Yeah, I got like mine hacked like many years ago. I had to shut it down.
It's not even because of your password got stolen.
Yeah, it could be anything.
It can be anything. I think it's on the other side. It's not even your responsibility that your the Gmail, Hotmail account got hacked.
Yeah. So that's why I only use it. Back then I was only using it for like gaming, online gaming. It's like, got annoying. Every day I keep on getting an email from Blizzard saying I'm trying to sell my World of Warcraft account, and I don't play World of Warcraft.
All right. So here's the description of word processing. I'm assuming most of you either know word processing already or have read this particular part of the book. So I'm gonna skip certain features here, or the layout of the screen, this is actually very specific to Windows. Microsoft Office Word. But I do want to point out one thing about this part here. Can word processing software improve my writing? And the answer is definitely yes. Okay, just the spell check all by itself is a worthwhile feature. Now, spell check can only help so much because if a spelling mistake is so bad that it matches some other word that is not intended, then the spell checker cannot help because it doesn't check spelling based on context. It's just looking at a word and say, okay, what is the closest word in the dictionary, to whatever is spelled here. So sometimes it helps and sometimes it doesn't. It really helps if you can get it very close to the original spelling most of the time. Then spell check works almost 100%. But it also has, sorry, go ahead.
No.
It also has a thesaurus. A lot of word processors have a thesaurus either built into it or you can add to it. LibreOffice has it. Microsoft Office definitely has it, and it gives you words of the same meaning or very similar meanings, just like a paper-based thesaurus. Except this one you just right-click and it shows you all the words that have similar meanings. Why would you want to use a thesaurus? Because your English professor says
To avoid repetition.
to avoid repetition. So that's mostly for either creative writing, a writing class, or something like that. People who write technical manuals would actually try to do the reverse. Try to use the same words consistently instead of using 20 gazillion ways to mean the same thing. So it depends on what you're writing. For certain types of writing, you don't want to use a thesaurus, and for certain other types of writing, that's what you want. Grammar checker is actually quite helpful if you configure it correctly. If you do not configure it correctly, it can complain about every little bit of style. Okay, sometimes it's not just that you have a spelling, you have a grammar mistake. Sometimes it's because your style of writing is not what the grammar checker thinks is the best. So you can spend some time to configure the grammar checker so that it only checks for certain things but not other things. In your English writing classes, are you allowed to use these tools?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I don't see any reason why not to. Because I think the human brain can do this, but if a tool can do it more efficiently, I think our mind can be used for something else. I mean, that's my personal thinking. Even to date, there are professors who say do not use Wikipedia, even on technical stuff. I can see how you do not want to use Wikipedia if you want to run a political science class, because a certain web page can change on an hourly basis. Have you guys heard of that kind of stuff going on? Like there's a web page for a particular senator, let's say, and the senator will hire people to write really good things about him or her, okay? And then the opposing team will try to change the wiki document to reflect what they think of this particular senator. Now maybe both sides are being honest. They just don't see other things, the other side of the facts. But nonetheless, you can see the wiki page getting changed on an hourly basis. I think one particular senator hired some staff to actually do this, and the senator kept denying that he did that, and people were able to use IP tracking to track it back to his office. It's like, yeah, it came from your office. It's not just somebody on the web who wanted to support you. You did it. Okay, I think this part I'm going to skip a little bit. There's no need to talk about this kind of stuff, I think, in the class. I just have one thing to mention. I don't think I really need to mention it in this class. When you want alignment to look right, don't use spaces. Okay, use tabs, use paragraph style, and use other ways to make it look and align right. Let's say you're writing a resume and you have to line up your name and all the other fields. Use tabs. Okay, learn the more advanced features. The learning curve is a little bit steeper when you do it that way, but on the other hand, once you learn it, your document will look right no matter how much you edit it, because it just is structured right in that case. So I'm going to move on to the next page, spreadsheets. Spreadsheets are actually one of the applications that most people do not use, but they can actually use it for many, many different applications or many different purposes, I should say, because applications is the name of the software and then purposes is what we use it for. What exactly is a spreadsheet? From the most simplistic point of view, it's a big table. Okay, it's a big, huge table, and you can type numbers or text, any type of item into each cell of the table. But it can do a lot more than that. It can do calculations, and that's why people use spreadsheets. I can give you a demonstration. Do you guys want to use Google Doc as an example, or do you want to use LibreOffice as an example? I can work either one. Anything but Microsoft Office.
Google Doc.
Google Doc? Okay, so we'll do it in Google Docs. And I'll go ahead and open up a new document, create document. And oops, I picked the wrong type, sorry. Create spreadsheet. And what did I tell you? It's a big table. Okay? But in addition to being a big table, you can do calculations. So I'll just make it very simple. Okay? We'll just have X, a column for X, a column for Y, and a column for X plus Y. So let's say this is one of your lab reports. I think your lab report will go a little bit more complex. So we'll just say X plus Y to the power of 2. Okay, so we'll just make it a little bit more complex. And let's say you have collected some data points. So let's say this is 3, this is 8, 2, 6, and we'll have 7 and 2. 5 and 15, doesn't matter. Okay, now with this particular column, if I don't know how to use a spreadsheet correctly, I will do the calculations by hand. So I will say, what is 3 plus 8 squared? 64 is 8 squared, plus 3, it would be 67, right? So I'll type 67 here. Now, if I do it this way, and I decided later on and say, oh, sorry, I made a mistake here. This is not 8, it's actually 8.5. I will have to remember to update this particular cell because it is supposed to depend on the other one. Now, because I do know how to use a spreadsheet, I can do this instead. I start the entire thing with an equal symbol, and this convention is universal to all spreadsheet programs, all modern spreadsheet programs. So I say equal, and then I click this cell, and say it is the same as A2 plus the square of this cell, and square is just using the caret symbol, and then the 2, and now it automatically calculates 67. So you might think that I will have to repeat this for all the other cells. Look at this little thing here. If I drag the lower right corner of a cell, I can replicate that formula across all the other cells. So that makes my job a whole lot easier. Now, if I go back and change the values, let's say we just make this change here to 8.5, you can see the value on column C is updated automatically. Now this is really the most primitive use of a spreadsheet. It is capable of a lot more than what I just demonstrated here. And are there any questions at this point about what I just showed here? Yep.
How did you put them together? So automatically?
Every cell in column C has an equation. So if I double click it, it shows what the equation is. So instead of storing just the number as an answer, it is referring to A2 and B2 in this case, and also specify the formula to compute the actual value of C2 in this case. Yep, and you can make the equation as complicated as you want to, especially with numerical calculations. Most spreadsheet programs have, exponent, log, sine, cosine, arctangent, and all the other good stuff that you normally have to use. I don't use a calculator anymore because when I have access to a computer, a spreadsheet is so much easier to deal with. Any questions about this part? Now you can also make a graph out of it. I'm pretty sure in your science classes, sometimes you have to graph stuff. So you just select the cells. In this case, I'm going to plot this particular thing against y, and I say insert, and I zoom ratio is too small. Let me see if I can do it this way. Chart. And it gives you choices. And here we have nope, that's not what I want. I want to use I want an XY chart. Okay, so we want to look at chart types, and then I want a scatter. Scatter works. And then once you specify scatter, you can also customize, so you connect all the points. But give me that option.
Yeah, the trend line.
Trend line.
It was on the one where you chose scatter. Just second to left.
Where is it again?
Second from the bottom, right above more.
It's one of the styles, yeah.
I don't. Yeah, that's not it. Because this is a XY plot, and then within the XY plot, I can choose this. I haven't used it for this particular purpose. Maybe it's one of these options here. There you go. Nope, doesn't give me an option to connect the dots.
Isn't it just line under charts?
Lines on the chart.
So it's the
first one, isn't it?
line chart right there at the top.
No, these are
No.
different.
You just put them more.
Hmm?
The last one.
Ooh, look at that. You can display as a gauge or tree map. That's interesting. Yep. But as you can see, there are different options. But this one would be a scatter chart, and it would be nice if I can find out, how to connect the dots. But at least, I can do this part here, and I can go back and change it later on too. So this is another use of a spreadsheet, is to plot data or plot charts out of your data points. Pretty useful for your science labs and stuff like that. There are many other things you can do with a spreadsheet. I cannot talk about all the other stuff that has to do with the equations. In other words, you can specify a value in one cell, and that will tell another cell where to look for information. You can also use it to look up information on a particular column. There's a lot of functionality in a spreadsheet. If you want to learn how to use a spreadsheet, we have cisc310, I think, as a spreadsheet class. To you guys, it should be a pretty easy class to take, but it's still useful. They talk about all the useful features of a spreadsheet. Okay. Any questions about this? What a spreadsheet is? And we'll move on. Formatting options. We'll have some software, related to these applications, and it will be the last time we use Cengage for a lab, but we'll try it out. All right, the next major type of application or office type application is a database. Now, this is really quite misleading. When we talk about Microsoft Office or LibreOffice, when we talk about database, it's actually referring to the front end of a database, but not quite the back end of a database. The difference is, the back end of a database is where information is actually stored, and it requires a lot of expertise to maintain the back end of a database. The front end of the database would be the forms. Okay, you present a form for someone to enter, last name, first name, address, phone number, social security number, student ID number. And so you can just enter data into a database. You can also use a feature to generate reports. Like if I want to generate a report of all students who have not turned in homework for the last 2 times, I can specify a query. It can generate a report like that. And when we talk about a database program, this is what it's referring to, is the front end of a database, how to use a database, but not quite a back end of a database. But even this type of software is becoming a dinosaur in today's age. Why do you think a dedicated database front-end program like Access, so that you can present a form for people to enter data, or you can present a user interface to generate a report? Why do you think this kind of software is going to become a dinosaur? It's going to go away soon. How do we do it now? Or what is the preferred way of doing this? Remember the discussion of the cloud. We want to move everything somewhere other than your own computer. So how do we do things like these now? Generating reports, entering data. How about your web browser? You think your web browser can do all this stuff? With the proper software written on the other side, the answer is definitely yes. Okay, I'm just going to draw a picture to basically describe the differences between the two approaches. Could someone turn on the lights, please, so I can draw on the whiteboard, and so you guys can see exactly what is going on. Okay, thank you. All right, so we'll use the one side of the whiteboard for the first approach and the other side of the whiteboard for the other approach. On this side, we'll use a local application. And in this case, it's Microsoft Access, which is a database front-end program. On the other side, we'll use a cloud-based approach, and there's no particular product, for that type of application. When you have a local application, what that means is all you really need is a desktop computer. So I'm just going to draw this. It's a desktop computer. On the other side, on a cloud-based approach, you need a server. So I'm going to use this as a server rack and a particular device for the user to interact with it. Now that part is already kind of interesting, because what do you think you need to interact with an application that's running on the server rack as a web application? You can use anything from your smartphone to a full-up computer. It doesn't matter. Your TV can be a terminal. So on this side, when this application is cloud-based, you still need, let's not miss the important part, which is the internet. But on the other side of the internet, you can now have smartphones, you can have a laptop computer, you can have a desktop computer, you can have a tablet. You can have any type of interface that has a keyboard or a screen or an on-screen keyboard. It doesn't matter, depending on what you're doing. On this side, where do you think the database or where do you think the data is actually stored? We'll talk about what it is used for. Huh? Locally, exactly. So you have your local hard drive on your computer that is being used to store the information in a database. On this side, the cloud, or a particular system in the cloud, is used to store the data. Now the interesting part about being in the cloud is you cannot really see which machine physically stored the data, because it can be distributed over multiple servers for redundancy. But for the purpose of this diagram, we'll just say that it is stored here. The next thing is, what type of program do you need to install in order to use the front end? Use the form, the report generator, and stuff like that. In this case, you need to install a local application. So the application is actually installed locally to the computer that you are using. You have your choices. You install LibreOffice, Microsoft Office, and there are a few other options too. FileMaker, okay.
Schools love that program for some reason.
It is, but only schools. Nobody else.
No one
uses
else uses it. I know.
Yeah. How about on this side? Sorry. On this side, what do you need to install on every single one of these devices?
An internet browser.
A web browser of some kind. Okay. So you only need a web browser. On every single device, that's all you need. Now, do you think a web browser comes with all the devices that we mentioned?
Yes.
Tablets, smartphones, netbooks, laptops.
Unless it's an old phone.
Even with a text-based terminal, I can still have a web browser. I'll show it to you guys later, because most people do not believe can I really browse the web without a graphical user interface? The answer is absolutely yes. It's just painful. Okay. So now, this is a big problem. This is a big difference between this approach and the other approach, because with this approach here, what if one day you accidentally drop your cell phone on when you're trying to get into your car in the garage, and then you rolled over your cell phone, so your cell phone is no more. Okay, what happened to the data? It's still here. Okay, so you go back to T-Mobile with the remaining parts of your cell phone. They activated another cell phone going, please don't roll over it again. What do you need to do to get back onto your data? You just need to sign in again. That's all.
That was easy.
In this case, what happens if this particular computer got destroyed, or the hard drive itself just decided when to go bad?
Gone.
Your data is
Unless you
gone.
backed it up.
Your data is gone. Okay, unless you have a backup, your data is gone. So the other approach is actually a little bit better from that perspective too. The only big difference, or the only part that makes this approach a little bit more friendly compared to the other approach, is how you design the form and how you get the form to be runnable, so they can use the form here. On this side, you have GUI tools, graphical user interface tools, to design the forms, to design the reports, to design everything. So everything is point and click. What you see is what you get. On the other side here, the person or the people who have to develop the software, they use PHP, they use Perl, they use Python, they use all kinds of languages running on this server to query the database and generate the HTML documents. So you have multiple languages to deal with in this case, because the cloud computer, or the server, has to run one of the scripting languages. It can be PHP. These two are the ones that I use the most, but you also have a whole bunch of others. Python. You have Visual Basic. What is the name for that? ActiveScript? No.
ActiveX.
ActiveX? No. No. On the server side, it's called something else. ASP, Active Server Page, I think. ASP, Active Server Page. You also have some other options. I cannot remember.
.NET.
I think ASP covers .NET too. They come from the same source. But you have these languages that runs on the server side. But when you generate the web page, you also have to understand other languages like CSS. It's not a programming language. It stands for Cascading Style Sheet. But it's a very important piece of the entire thing, because you can change entirely how something is presented on the screen by changing just this cascading style sheet. So it can look right on the big monitor. It can also look right on the smartphone, just by changing the cascading style sheet of the document. Obviously, you need to know HTML, hypertext meta language, but you also need to know JavaScript, which is a programming language in this case, and it runs on the web browser. JavaScript has come a long way. Before, it's only used for certain animations, validating the data input and stuff like that. But JavaScript today is very powerful. It can be used to do just about any type of programming on the browser end.
Isn't JavaScript getting rewritten in jQuery?
Yeah, they just renamed it, but it's basically the same thing.
Yeah, I know.
Yep. Okay, so these are the two approaches. This is the dinosaur. It's going away sometime soon, and this is the way of the future. Everything is going to be cloud-based. But we still haven't talked about what a database is. Okay, let's think about how you would use a database instead of explaining what it is. Let's think about how you use a database. Turn off the lights. Good exercise. Okay, how would you use a database? Let's just say that somebody is going to take care of the back end, how the tables and stuff is going to be stored. From the end user's perspective, how do we use a database? Have we used a database application in this class?
No.
Well, have you guys logged into Moodle?
Yeah.
Guess what? Moodle is a database application. It's just that we don't see it that way because we look at the screensaver is going to kick in. I just want to see which one he picks this time. It's gonna, I guess it's gonna wait a little bit before activating the screensaver. All right, never mind. Okay, but Moodle is a database application because what do you think is storing your scores with your homework assignments? What's storing your username, your password, and stuff like that? It's a database, okay? So Moodle is already one database application. It's really complex, there's a lot of code to it, but it's a database application. Can someone give me a easier, simpler example of a database?
Address.
Sorry?
Address book.
An address book, very good. Okay, Christmas is coming up real soon. In fact, I would start my Christmas shopping now. But how do you keep track of, all the people that you have to send, Christmas cards to, and keep track of who sent you a card last year, for the past few years or whatnot? You can use a database. Okay. Now, the use of a database in this case is very handy because you can also link a database that stores, addresses and who has sent you, Christmas cards for the past few years. You can link that to a word processor. Now, why would you want to do something like that? Because you can automate the printing of labels for the envelope. Okay, so you don't have to write. Okay, grandma would probably complain and say, please, for once, write the address of the envelope. But if you're running out of time, it can be automated. Sorry?
Or if you just don't care.
Or if you don't care.
Yeah, I could write it.
I would even go one step further. I think there are services out there already. You can just send a list of addresses, names, and personal messages, and you can even pick the card, the design of the card, and somebody else can do it all for you.
Yeah.
They will print out the card, they will send it out, and so you don't even need to deal with paper at all at home.
Just tell them when you want it done, and they'll send it to.
Yeah.
They have e-cards too, which is like a digital version.
Right, but for grandma, e-card doesn't work. Grandma wants the actual card with your picture on it. So that's why
Weird like that.
So I think there's a certain type of a value to a service, probably stemming as a side business of an e-card business to actually print and send out physical cards to addressees. Okay, you can specify I want these people to get physical cards, and then these people only get an e-card.
They're not the worth the physical card. They get cold.
They're not worth the trees. All right, but are there any other questions about what a database, or from the user's perspective, what a database is? It's just something in the back end of a computer program that can be used to store, index, and retrieve information. That's it. Okay. How do we interact with the database? Since I said it's a back-end program, how does a particular program interact with a database? It's by a particular query language. It's SQL. SQL, is a query language, and it basically asks the database, hey, look up this table. A table is kind of like a spreadsheet, but it's not. Look up this table and return all the rows that meet these requirements. And you can specify the requirements as, you can sort by name and say, I want these people with this last name, or you can search by date, you can search by, many other attributes. SQL by itself is at least one or two classes. It's a very complex language. But for the most part, it's just a language to ask a database and say, hey, tell me, do you have any information on these things? Are there any questions about this slide? What is a database and why it is useful from the end user's perspective? Questions? Okay. What do you think is the job market for people who write mobile apps that can either mobile app or design web pages and program in one of these languages so that the content inside the database can be displayed or queried and searched using a web interface, like just a regular web browser, what would be the job outlook for those particular jobs?
High demand.
They're in high
Especially
demand.
people who know PHP, because PHP is an off-server and client-based programming language that works on both sides.
It's mostly server
It's
side
mostly
as far as
server,
I know.
but it still works on both sides.
Okay.
It's a lot of people, a lot of web designers, if they know how to do it in PHP,
Mhm.
it gets rid of the need for HTML and CSS because they could now encode it to it and use jQuery to
Right, it's-
overwrite. So that's why I say their job outlook is a lot farther than basic web designers, because basic web designers usually learn
HTML.
CSS and HTML, and they
Mhm.
stop. But they don't know that
Right.
the market is actually now in JavaScript and PHP,
Mhm.
where web browsers now are actually more efficient because it's running off of the same programming language.
Mhm.
And most web browsers now,
Unless you're using Microsoft products.
it's like
Yes,
it's
compatibility.
more seamlessly. Like Microsoft, the Internet Explorer,
Mhm.
it has big problems with CSS.
Yeah.
Yeah, I took a web design class. It
Mhm.
took forever to get CSS to work correctly with it.
That's because it does not conform to the standards. Internet Explorer has a long history of not conforming to published standards, whereas Firefox and Chrome, they may miss some standards, but whatever they implement is consistent with what the standard says. Internet Explorer will choose a different interpretation of the standard, so it's not like the feature is missing, it's just that they do something that's different.
Yeah.
Yep. So, okay, did everybody get the discussion? What it means, all the terms that we just talked about? No? Okay, we can talk about it. I think that's important because it really gives you a larger picture of what is going on and what is the trend. Because I'm assuming most of you want to get a job of some kind later on. Nah, my dad would just support me all the way. All right, so I'll just go ahead and use a text editor, for this content here. Okay, first of all, let's talk about HTML, which is the easiest of all the languages. This is hypertext markup language. Okay, HTML is really easy to learn because it's basically how you can format a very, very basic web page. Okay, you can have content in boldface, in italic, you can specify paragraphs, you can insert pictures and stuff like that, and that's HTML. In other words, HTML, if I want to say what it is useful for, it is useful to specify content. Okay, not even the format so much, but just the content. Okay, what is the article? What is the content what is your blog? Okay, your blog wants to talk about something specifically. How do you want to organize the content? That's what HTML is useful for. What about the part about I want to display, a sidebar here, a bar over here. I want this portion to be scrollable and stuff like that. That can be done in HTML, but you're not encouraged to do that part in HTML. That part is done by CSS, which is cascading style sheet. Okay. And this one specifies layout and format. In other words, if you think about the publication of a book, the person, the author, who's coming up with the content would use HTML to specify the content. But the publisher will have an editor, someone who actually controls the layout of the book, pictures on this side, footnotes, specify this way, and stuff like that. That person would use CSS. And these two can be completely independent. Now, they need some agreement. Okay, in other words, the person who's using HTML has to correctly identify this paragraph is a footnote. Okay, but once that part is identified, the CSS can take over and say, oh, for footnotes, I want those to display down here. And you can even control the font, how it's displayed, the color of the font, and stuff like that. They can all be done, and they should be done in CSS, in cascading style sheet. But neither of these are programming languages. In other words, they do not specify logic or how to do something. They only control, the content and also the layout, but there's no logic, associated with these. So with only these two, you can only specify static content. Okay, I can write a blog entry, and I can make a static page, that will display correctly, whether we have a big screen TV at 1080p, or whether we want to do it on a cell phone. If you do this cascading style sheet correctly, the same content can be displayed correctly on any device. Are there any questions at this point about HTML and CSS, what they're useful for? If you want to learn these two, the class you want to take, it's kind of like a shameless plug of our own classes, but some people may want to learn these things because they are really useful. cisc310 here at ARC will teach these two. Okay, but as I said, just knowing HTML and CSS is not going to be very helpful because you can only specify static content. For the most part, if you want to get a job with any type of web-based businesses, you need to know how to work with a database in the back end and generate your documents using HTML and CSS. Let me give you an example of what I mean by generating content. We'll go to Google Chrome here, and then we'll go to, everything here is actually a web page. It's actually in HTML and CSS, but these are fairly complex examples. We'll go to something that's less complex. We'll go to Moodle, okay? Just the front page of Moodle, just like this. If you do a right click and say you view page source, this is all in HTML. This is what HTML looks like. Okay, for the most part, it's just dealing with the tags. In other words, if I pick something that's typical, a lot of these is not very typical. Okay, right here is a typical one. This part here is a single paragraph. I can tell because this is the beginning of a tag or an identifier for a paragraph, and this is the matching end to identify this is the end of a paragraph. And obviously, this is just the content of the paragraph. Okay, that's HTML. CSS is not included here because it is actually quote unquote included from somewhere else. So if you go all the way back to the beginning of the document, it would refer to a particular CSS somewhere. Style sheet right here. So if I open up the style sheet in a different terminal, this is actually the style sheet or CSS. It specifies the background is white, the foreground is black, and it applies to these particular elements in a document. So that means if I make one change here, instead of FFF, which is controlling the values of RGB, red, green, and blue, if I change one of these, or change this number, I can change the color of the text on screen without changing every individual one because I'm changing the style of everything at once. Okay, so that's cascading style sheet. Now let's go back to the document itself. What if I make some changes to the layout here? Or do you think I actually hand entered what we just saw here? This source code here, do you think somebody hand entered everything here? It's not, right? I only have to specify parts that are specific to my website, but for the most part, this is automatically generated by a program. Okay?
Yeah.
Sorry?
Can you use Dreamweaver for that?
No, it uses PHP. Moodle is a PHP type of application,
Right.
but it uses PHP as a program to generate these pages. So we have a program generating documents that use HTML and CSS, cascading style sheet. Okay. So now we can take a quick look. Okay, this is obviously not the right class to talk about the details, but we can certainly take a quick look here. So right now I'm logging into the Moodle server itself. Oh, it doesn't have a user account, so I need to change that. Half the class can guess my password from hearing the clicks, right?
Yeah, right.
Entirely possible.
No, actually I just typed the shift key a whole bunch of times and the space bar and then enter. The password is just space and enter, right? All the other clicks are just the shift key. I'm just messing with you. Okay, so actually I don't even have to do that part. No, that's not where I installed it. There we go. Okay, so this is a folder. This is called a command line interface. This is how people use computers back in the good old days before we have graphical user interfaces. How many people have never seen anything like this or used this type of interface to make a computer work? You can be honest. I really do not expect people in this kind of class to have much exposure to the command line interface because people just don't do it anymore. There's no need to use interfaces like this anymore. So I would just go ahead and take a look at a particular document, which is the index document. I really meant another command. There we go. And this is PHP. This is actual code, and it tells the server how to use the database, how to retrieve content from the database, and then use the logic specified here to generate the document that we just looked at, the HTML document and the cascading style sheet. The CSS is for the most part static, it just pulls it out of a file. But the actual content is generated using a program like this. Okay? But this is not all, because it also has to send JavaScript code onto the client side. So that means there's yet another programming language involved in this whole deal. That programming language can also be seen, it can actually be examined when you look at the source code here. And let's try to look for, there we go. So this is actual JavaScript, it's kind of all mushed in. Okay, let's open this up. I guess I cannot just open a JavaScript code, but this is the JavaScript include file, so it will do certain things correctly. So we are talking about a mixture of many different types of languages, some only useful for specifying content, others only be useful specifying logic on the server side, which is the remote side, and some are useful to specify logic on the local side. What do you want to specify on the local side? I mean, it seems like all the work should be done by the server. Why do you want some logic to be running on the server side, the client side, the browser side, on your own computer?
So it can access the server side.
So you can access the server side, but when you submit a page, when you click something, that will send information back already. So why do you want to run some additional logic on the local side?
Makes it run faster.
It can provide a more seamless experience. In other words, when you want to refresh something, it doesn't have to refresh the entire page. It can refresh just a portion of an entire page. Have we seen something like that today? Just refreshing certain parts of a web page and not the entire page all the time? Remember Google Documents? Let's switch back to Google Documents. So we switch back to a Word document a word processing document like this. This is one web page. It only looks like an application, but it is a web page. So if you right-click and look at the page source, you will see the source code of this, which is huge. But the most important part is when I type something here, okay, like this, did you see the screen refreshing 5 times and every single time reloading the entire page?
Oh yeah.
It did not. It did not. It did not refresh the entire page. Now, how can it do something like this? I'm changing the content of the web document, and yet I'm not seeing the entire document to update every single time. In fact, I did not even have to click submit or any link in the process. How did that happen? In other words, in this grand scheme of things, which component made this possible?
I know which to do it. I know what you
It's JavaScript.
Yeah.
And this particular technology is called Ajax. Okay, Ajax, it allows a particular web page that has JavaScript running to be able to submit changes back to the server and update only certain parts of the screen and not the entire screen. It's called Ajax, and that's also becoming a very important programming topic if someone wants to become a web programmer. Yep.
Is that also how things like Twitter, Facebook, and
Yeah,
others?
absolutely. A lot of the work that makes the user interface very seamless and very interactive is mostly done in JavaScript. because it allows only part of the screen to get updated and not the entire screen has to update. Okay. Any other questions about what we have seen here? I digressed a little bit from the discussion of Office-based applications, but this is important because this is where everything is going. Okay, the days of having to install massive amount of applications and programs on your computer is almost gone. Okay, we're not quite there yet, but it is almost gone. We are.
Zach,
Yep.
the PHP, was that the automated software program that was automatically putting that script there?
Yes. Yeah, the PHP program is responsible to include the JavaScript that is running on your browser as a part of the document that is sent to your computer. But it's two different programming languages. They have certain similarities in terms of syntax, but they are two different programming languages altogether. And PHP runs on the server side for the most part, and then JavaScript runs on the client side, which is your browser. So that's why there are so many pieces to a quote-unquote web application, and to become a successful web developer, you have to know all of them. You may not have to design really well, like how to lay out a screen or choose the right color or the right font, but you do need to know all the pieces and how to integrate every piece together. I want to show you something a little bit different, and I want to show you this learn.caconnects.org. Okay, this is an ongoing project at ARC. We are promoting computer literacy to underserved communities, and this is an easy interface for people to get into programming. So when you click, let's say the first topic here, it will introduce very general topics. I don't think it's really appropriate for this class because we are a little bit beyond this. It talks about computers and its parts. When you click on these items, you will see individual items. Computer and their parts. So each one has a very small discussion and reasons to learn about computers and their parts. Some people compare that to appliances, cars, and stuff like that. And we talk about what a desktop computer is, what a laptop computer is, and so on and so forth. And then there's a review of terms, just kind of like a textbook. Except this is actually available for free on the internet for anyone who wants to learn about computer literacy. Do you think that resembles Moodle in any way?
Yes.
It is Moodle in the back end. Now this is a very interesting project because we have to facelift Moodle because our target audience cannot handle all 20 gazillion links on Moodle. Okay? They want something that is a lot simpler, and this is a lot simpler compared to the actual full interface of Moodle. So what happens here is I have scripts calling upon scripts in order to make something like this happen. Okay, and it's a very interesting project because somebody has to come up with the design. Okay, instead of the typical Moodle interface, we now have these buttons that people can click. Someone has to work with the layout. CSS controls the presentation of the topics instead of the usual Moodle presentation. Let me log in so we can compare the differences. For this class. So instead of presenting the topics this way, it is now presented using this way. But most of the work is still done by Moodle code. I just have another layer of scripts in between to do some of the tweaks. It was a very interesting topic to make PHP talk to Pro and then talk back to PHP again. So that's, but this is a good example of, why you need to learn multiple languages if you want to become a web developer. Are there any questions about, I never really explained what a web developer is. Who is a web developer? What do you think a web developer do for a living?
Design web pages.
Not design web pages. A web developer would take the design from a designer and actually write the code to generate the web pages that will look like what a designer designs. But the content, for the most part, will be coming from a database. So I forgot one important language here that I really should also include. Can someone kind of remind me which one I forgot? I mentioned that language, I never wrote it on the board. SQL. So PHP is the glue of everything. So in a single PHP document, it can refer to SQL to go ask the database for something. It can use, it will generate documents using CSS and HTML. It will also generate documents that will include JavaScript so it can run on the other side. So PHP is basically, quote unquote, the glue of everything because it is the centerpiece that will have to interpret and generate all the other pieces. In this case, Perl can serve the same function, Python can serve the same function, same thing with ASP. So these are all web scripting languages, and they can all serve the same purpose. It's just the syntax is different. Some can only run on Microsoft platforms, and minor differences. Once you learn one, learning the other one should be fairly easy.
What does PHP stand for again?
PHP, well, there are different interpretations. And they changed the interpretation. I do not know the current one. Does anyone know? I can just look it up. Hypertext preprocessor. That's the current reincarnation of the abbreviation. Perl stands for Practical Extraction and Retrieval Language. And there are big differences between the two. Most people use PHP because it's quote unquote the industry standard, but I personally like Perl a lot better because PHP has backward compatibility issues. Every time they release a new version, they can break old code. When I say breaking, it's not just saying, well, we don't use that feature anymore, it's deprecated, but we'll just let you slide and use it. No, they just break it, okay? Your program won't run anymore. Okay, we just ran into that problem earlier this semester. Perl, on the other hand, is much more backward compatible. So a lot of times they will deprecate or make certain features obsolete, but it will just give you a warning and say, well, let's not use this feature anymore because it's not, it's not useful, or we have newer features that can do the same thing, but it's better. I use Perl a lot. I only use PHP when I have to, but a lot of products use PHP. The other difference is Perl has a huge library of stuff. In other words, if you have to deal with SSL encryption, if you want to deal with anything, somebody has written a module for that already in Perl. And you just have to go to cpan.org to look up the library, make sure it's installed on your server. Then you can do it without writing your own code. PHP, on the other hand, doesn't have quite an extensive library like that. So that's why I use Perl more than PHP personally. But a lot of products out there are actually using PHP, so I don't really get a choice. Any questions about this part? Is anyone here interested in web programming or web development? That's one way you can make a living, or at least make some money before you get your bachelor's degree, because the demand is so high and there are different levels of web development. So just before I end today's class, let me just update this list here. After CISW 300, you can take 310, which is a client-side scripting class. And then after that, you can take CISW 400 or 420. Those are server-side scripting classes. Sorry? Okay. So these are classes that you can take, here at ARC, and I think, it doesn't hurt to take those classes. Yep. Go ahead.
How many of them would you ever take before you want to stop?
It depends on what you want to do. If you just want to design, like web pages, the static content, I think if you take CISW 300, and we have another class on cascading style sheet, those two will give you enough knowledge to design web pages, to specify static content. But if you want to do any type of server end, work, you have to take the 400 series. Okay. Yep.
Is there a prereq for those classes?
They have prerequisites, but if you already have experience working with, let's say you already have worked with HTML, and CSS for a while, you can challenge the prerequisite. In other words, you go to the office, you get a form, and then you just list your work experience, maybe provide some sample work that you have done so far, and they can waive your prerequisite to some of these classes.
Okay. So I have to go to the admin office?
No, it's our area office. It's the
Oh,
BCS
okay.
division office. Just tell them that you want to challenge the prerequisite of the class. They'll give you the form. You just fill in the form, staple your samples and your justifications, and turn it back in. Yep.
Thanks.
Sure. All right. That's it. I'll see you guys next Tuesday. Have a nice weekend.
Tuesday. Yeah.
Sure. Go ahead.
I was wondering, I think I forgot, was the quiz due today or something? We're
Sorry?
supposed to have a quiz due today too?
The
The homework
Yeah,
for
the
chapter
homework is
2.
due today.
So if I forgot about it, if we don't do it, we don't I don't get
Did
nothing.
you forget completely?
I forgot completely. Usually I've been talking a lot about it in class, so
Right.
didn't do it. So I was wondering if I do it now. So did I get any credit or no?
I think it might have closed already. So if I open it, I have to reopen it to the entire class.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, it's.
I wasn't
that's
even
the
paying
point.
attention to it. I just
Yeah,
realized
it
it.
closed at 9 a.m. So yeah, I'll just go ahead and reopen it so they have the rest of today to finish it.
Close it like tomorrow or Thursday at 9.
I'll close it at 11:55 tonight.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I'll just send a
Thanks.
notification to the whole class.
Thank you.
Good. I was just wondering if you've ever made a game before or anything like that.
Make a game?
Yeah.
No, I do not have any experience making games, but if you do want to make a game, there's a quick and easy way to do it. There's a website called Roblox, ROBLOX.com, and they basically give you a virtual environment and all the simulation stuff already. So you only have to add your own logic for your game to work. You can make a first-person shooter game like real easy. Because they have the 3D engine and everything else, and it's all web-based, so you don't have to install like tons of development tool on your own computer.
The only problem with that is that you have to get past the fairly childish interface, because it is based on geared towards children, or at least it seems to be at this time.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, yeah. I was just wondering if you ever did.
And exercise self-control so you don't spend all day playing games over there.
Hey, see you
Sorry? Second, sorry? Oh, okay. Yeah, I misspoke. Sorry.
I'm not enrolled in this class, but I watched all that shit pretty good.
Oh my god.
You're not enrolled in P300 or C310?
I'm in cisc310 in a different class, and I'm having trouble, so I'm wondering if I can just...
Sure, yeah. Just go ahead and find a seat.
You gave me an F on the homework, and I don't know why.
I did. Which one?
The last one I was reading.
Okay, are you talking about? Are you in P300 or C310?
I wasn't expecting the seats, but I don't know why I wasn't.
300?
In this class.
Okay, in the current class.
Yeah.
Did I leave a comment?
No, you didn't. I wanted to check it.
Okay, I cannot check it right now because I have to get ready for the class. Can you send me an email so I can review it?
I'm having trouble with that. Like, I tried sending you one.
Movie up?
No,
reply,
I get it. It's just
Okay.
I wouldn't have made that connection.
Like, because I just with my friends. I had to work my head and it's kind of there.
Okay.
I don't know why I got an F on it.
Okay, is it an F or is it not rated like an F?
Well, it says like 2.2%, but like you put the grade on the bottom, but on the homework assignment, like you plugged it in. This time you didn't, but you only put the final grade on the bottom. Like I went down to the, I scrolled down and it says total standards right now. And the 5% is not plugged in or anything at all. I don't understand why.
But I was like
Okay.
16, so it was like
Alexander.
so it fall down on my base.
I cannot show you the grades right now because the projector is on. So, we can do this maybe after class. Okay. All right. So I'm going to finish my part. It's still got a few minutes. Oh, okay, I got my part done already. So you got your part. Okay, so this is what's going to happen now is I'm going to bring this to the dean. The dean will sign it, but you have to pick it up from the office and then drop it off at the commission of records. For some reason, they don't want us to.
I already
drop
got
it
signed
off.
by the dean.
Oh, okay. You can
Just drop out
Yep,
admissions.
you're done. All right.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I mean, yeah, but it was like a decent, like belt line, nice one, but yes, expensive, but not ridiculous. But I was gonna replace it.